When people talk about a collapsing reality, they usually talk about the moment everything changed, the awakening, the breakthrough, the transformation, the beautiful before and after story. But what nobody really talks about is what comes next, because sometimes your reality collapses and 6 months later you're still trying to figure out how to breathe inside of what happened. You're still grieving, you're still exhausted, you're still trying to understand who you are now, and you're wondering why this doesn't feel anything like the beautiful transformation everyone promised it would be. Because when people talk about rebirth, they rarely talk about survival. They don't talk about the loneliness that can come with rebuilding. They don't talk about the instability, the uncertainty, the parts of healing that don't make for inspirational quotes. They don't talk about what happens when your old life collapses and your new one hasn't fully arrived yet. There is a strange space that exists between who you were and who you are becoming. And I don't think enough people talk about that space, because that space can feel terrifying. It's waking up every day and wondering what happens next. It's questioning whether you're moving forward because you don't feel like you're moving at all. It's feeling like you've lost so much that you're not even sure where to begin. And sometimes it isn't even the collapse itself that's hardest. It's what comes after. It's surviving the aftermath. Because a collapsing reality does not always look like a beautiful transformation. Sometimes it looks like an eviction, job loss, isolation, legal stress, burnout, betrayal, and being forced to rebuild your life while you are still grieving what happened. So no, this is not just a pretty transformation story. This is survival. This is stabilization. This is learning how to take one step while your life is still messy. And I wish more people talked about that, because I think we've unintentionally created these narratives around healing and transformation that make people feel like they're failing if their rebirth doesn't look beautiful. As if transformation should always feel expansive and inspiring. As if becoming should always feel magical. But what if that's not true? What if sometimes becoming looks like surviving Tuesday? What if it looks like finally getting out of bed after weeks of feeling overwhelmed? What if it looks like applying for one job, making one phone call, taking one walk, eating something nourishing, making it through another difficult day? What if stabilization isn't separate from your transformation? What if it is your transformation? Because surviving what tried to take you out matters too. And I think we overlook that far too often. We celebrate people's victories once they've made it to the other side, but we rarely honor what it took for them to survive long enough to get there. The sleepless nights, the fear, the uncertainty, the thousands of small choices they had to make while their life was still falling apart. There is something sacred about continuing anyway. Not because you're positive all the time, not because you've figured everything out, not because you're overflowing with hope every single day, but because despite everything that has happened, you are still here. And I know there are people watching this video who may feel guilty or frustrated because they haven't been able to rebound faster. But the thing is, you're tired, you're angry, you're grieving, you're trying to survive something that changed your life. And you've been told that you should simply surrender, trust the process, or embrace the transformation. But I want to offer something different. What if you don't need to force yourself to feel inspired right now? What if you don't need to romanticize what happened to you? What if you don't need to pretend that losing something important wasn't devastating? What if surviving is enough for today? There are seasons of life where thriving may not be available to you yet. There are seasons where your greatest accomplishment is that you made it through another day, and that still counts. I think one of the greatest acts of self-compassion is allowing yourself to tell the truth about where you are. Not where you think you should be, not where other people expect you to be, but where you actually are. Because if your reality has collapsed, there may be parts of you that are still trying to catch up to what happened. Healing isn't always linear. Transformation isn't always beautiful. And becoming isn't always graceful. Sometimes it is messy. Sometimes it is painfully slow. And sometimes what makes it so difficult isn't simply that you've changed. It's that the world continues moving while you're still trying to understand what happened to you. Life moves on. People move on. And there you are wondering why something that happened months ago, or perhaps even years ago, can still feel so present in your body and in your life. There can almost be a quiet shame that begins to creep in. You begin wondering whether you should be further along by now, whether you should have figured this out already, whether you should feel differently than you do, whether healing should look more beautiful than it has. And perhaps one of the greatest acts of self-compassion we can offer ourselves is releasing ourselves from someone else's timeline of what our healing should look like. Because healing is not a race, and becoming does not happen on a schedule. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, and slowly is still enough. Sometimes it looks like standing in the rubble of your old life, asking yourself what is possible from here. And sometimes the answer doesn't come right away. That's okay too. You do not have to become someone entirely new overnight. You do not have to have a 5-year plan for your pain. You do not have to know exactly where all of this is leading. Sometimes all you need to know is what the next step is, and sometimes that next step is incredibly small. Drink some water, send the email, take the walk, rest, ask for help. Begin again tomorrow if that's what is needed. Small steps are still steps. I think we've underestimated the courage that can exist in small things. There are moments in life when surviving looks extraordinary, and then there are moments when surviving looks incredibly ordinary. It looks like making the doctor's appointment, sending the email, showing up to work when your heart feels heavy, taking care of yourself when it would be easier not to, allowing yourself to rest without apologizing for needing it, and continuing to show up imperfectly when perfection is simply not available to you right now. There is something courageous about continuing, especially when life has given you every reason to withdraw from it, especially when you're tired, especially when you're grieving, especially when you're uncertain about what comes next. Continuing counts too. And finally, I want to say this to the person who feels like they're failing because their transformation looks more like survival than transcendence. You are not failing. You are surviving. And there is nothing small about that. If your reality has collapsed and all you have the capacity to do right now is stabilize, then let stabilization be enough. If all you can do is take one step today, let one step be enough. And if you're still grieving while rebuilding, let both things be true at the same time. You are allowed to become while still hurting. You are allowed to rebuild while still grieving. And you are allowed to survive before you learn how to thrive again. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear after everything you've been through. And perhaps nobody talks about this part enough. The part where you stay, the part where you survive, the part where, slowly and imperfectly, you begin creating a new reality from what tried to take you out. If this video helped you feel a little less alone in what you've been carrying, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll know when new videos are released. And if someone came to mind while listening to this video, consider sharing it with them as well. Sometimes we don't need someone to have all of the answers. Sometimes we simply need someone to help us put language to what we've been experiencing. And wherever you find yourself today, I hope you'll remember this. You are not failing because this has been difficult. You are allowed to move slowly. You are allowed to become while still hurting. And you are allowed to stay.